Okay. Thank you all. Thank you everyone for coming on Zoom, in person. Appreciate it. Last week's parasha, we read about Yaakov Avinu. He wrestles with an angel. Major battle. What happens? Yaakov Avinu is running away from Esav. He splits his camp, his family into two groups. And then he carries them, presumably one at a time, over the river. But Yavar es Asher Lo, he carries everybody over the river. And after he finishes carrying over all the people, so it says he carried over all his belongings. So there's nothing left. Everything is over the river. And Yaakov Avinu returns to the other side, that would be outside of Israel. The river was the river to get into Israel. And Yaakov Avinu remains alone. Vayivasar Yaakov levadai, he stands alone. Vayavik ish imai, and then an angel attacks him. An angel or a man, according to the simple version. And the question is, why did Yaakov go into a position where he would be vulnerable? Why did he go back over the river when his family and all his belongings were on the other side of the river? It's the Talmud in Chulin, the Tzadik Aleph and Aleph. The Talmud says he went back to get small jars, pachim ketanim. How does the Talmud know this? So it suggests that the word levado, lamed, vez, dalad, vav, could also be read as lekado, because the letters vez and chaf in Hebrew are very similar letters, and they could be interchanged. So actually, Vayivasu Yaakov levado means he went back to get his jugs. And at that time, when he goes back to get these jugs, that's when the angel of Esav comes and attacks him. Obviously, Yaakov's alone, it's dark, he's vulnerable. And the angel is not capable of killing Yaakov. That's what the angel attempts to do. V'yaraki lo yochela, he is unable to kill him. So what does he do? V'yiga b'kafi reicha, he hits him in his thigh, the femoral joint, and Yaakov limps along. In other words, as an aside, the angel here is clearly a terrorist, right? The angel is somebody who isn't going to win the fight, but clearly doesn't want to go down without doing at least something. So even though he loses the battle, but at least he manages to strike Yaakov in the thigh. What's the word for the thigh, the bone that he hits, the femoral joint? The kaf, the spoon. It's sort of a spoon-like joint. We'll explain. What's the significance of these pachim ketanim? What's the story with these jugs? So Rashi brings down the Gemara. Rashi quotes the Talmud, and Rashi says, and the Sifsei Chachamim points out, why is it necessary to provide a justification for what exactly Yaakov went back for? And how does Pachim Ketanim explain it? Says the Sifsei Chachamim as follows. The verse states that he took everything over the river. So whatever he didn't take over the river must have been very insignificant. If his family is over the river and all his belongings are over the river, what he left behind must have been insignificant. And that's why it's not included when the verse states he carried everything over the river. He carried everything, but there were insignificant things that were left behind. And Yaakov goes back to get these insignificant items. What does that mean? Why? Why did he go back to get them? What was significant about the insignificant items, as you might say? Right? So two of my ancestors, Rav Nosson Nota Shapiro, Megal Amukis, and Samach Vav, and Rabbi Shua Levi Horowitz, the Shlah, short for Shnei Luchas Abriz, Teres Shabbat Teres Tzayin Yosef, and Parshas Vayeshev. They were actually both contemporaries. The Shlah was a rabbi in Austria, later in Prague, and the Megal Amukis, Rav Nosson Nota Shapiro, was a rav in Krakow. He's buried there. His gravesite's still around. I've been there. They both note that this jug of Yaakov was sort of a spiritual allusion to the jug that the Chashminom would find later on in the temple. The jug that Yaakov goes back, the insignificant jug, is actually either the actual jug or sort of a spiritual revelation of the jug that they would later find at the time of the Chanukah miracle. Of course, you note the small jug, the pach. Pach is the same letters as kaf. So kaf is Yaakov's thigh. Pach is what he went back to get, the small jug. The word pach and kaf are the same letters. Sorry, right? Yeah, just the other way. Exactly, just the other way. In other words, what's happening here is this fight, this wrestling match between Yaakov and the angel of Esav is sort of the spiritual, premeditation of what's going to happen in the time of the Chanukah miracle. And we'll explain a little bit more. There's another point as well here. Yaakov's going back for something that's insignificant. And spiritually, the Chassidic masters teach there's another message going on here. Yaakov goes back into the night to pick up the insignificant items. Say the Chassidic masters, what that means is that at the end of time, when Mashiach comes, Mashiach is going to go around the world and he's going to look and see if he could find somebody, even if he could find the most insignificant Jew, however far he might be, he's going to go back and bring those Jews back. What Yaakov teaches here is that even insignificant things have to reach spiritual fulfillment. There is nothing that's insignificant. Every single Jew is significant. Every moment in time in the Jewish people's existence and Jews' life is going to have to achieve significance. And that's what Yaakov goes back to get. He goes back to get that original jug of oil. That original jug, according to some opinions, it was actually empty. This jug, which was insignificant, was an empty jug at the time. And he goes back to get the jug to signify the importance of every single Jew, no matter how insignificant they may appear. I'll try to explain this a little more. Where does this idea come from? Interestingly, the Talmud Menachos teaches that the best olive oil comes from a small town in Israel called Tekoa. Tekoa is alpha l'shemen. If you want to bring a sacrifice in the temple, ideally you get shemen from Tekoa. If you can't get from Tekoa, I think there's another two places you can get from as well. But the most premium olive oil, it's going to come from Tekoa. What's notable about the town of Tekoa? Says the Talmud, Tekoa, this town, everybody's smart. Why are they so smart? Because they have the best olive oil. As the verse states, Vayishlach Yoav Tekoa, vayikach misham isha chachama. Yoav sends for Tekoa, and he summons an intelligent woman. Isha chachama, a wise woman. Who is this wise woman? And why did Yoav call her? And what was the message that this woman's going to bring? At the time, King David had expelled Avshalom from the palace. Avshalom was taking revenge on Amnon. Amnon had raped Avshalom's sister Tamar, and in retribution for that, for an unpunished crime, Avshalom went ahead and sort of tricked Amnon into coming into a vulnerable situation, and he had his people kill Amnon. David was very upset about Avshalom killing Amnon, and therefore David expelled Avshalom from the palace for 3 years. And as time goes on, one sort of forgets about the dead, but one never forgets about the living. We find this in Torah many times. Yaakov Avinu never forgets about Yosef, because Yosef is captured. Yosef is still alive. But David can't forget about Avshalom, but he can forget about Amnon, because Amnon's dead, and Avshalom is banished from the palace. And Yoav sees an opportunity here. Yoav is the general of David HaMelech. He sees an opportunity to bring back Avshalom to the palace, and he hatches this elaborate scheme. He hires this woman, very intelligent woman, a widow from the town of Tekoa. And she comes to David HaMelech with the following scenario, a story that she claims happened. She had 2 sons. They got into a fight in the field. Nobody was around. One son killed the other one. Now the survivors, the relatives of the son that the murderer and the son that was murdered, the relatives want to exact vengeance on the murderer, on the son that killed. And so they want his blood. They want to kill the murderer. Her son ran away, her only surviving son. And remember, she's a widow. Her husband has no other descendants but this one remaining son. And the son runs. The murderer runs away, and he's in hiding. She knows the hiding spot, and the relatives are demanding that she reveal to them where the son is hiding. The relatives want to exact vengeance. They want to kill him. She doesn't know what to do. She comes to David HaMelech, this intelligent woman from Tekoa, as you can probably figure out at this point. She's also an actress, clearly. And this is she wants David to tell her that she does not have to reveal and divulge the hiding spot of her only surviving son. She pleads with David HaMelech. She says, look, I have no other children. My husband has no other children. He's dead. And I want to have a son that will survive. And I don't want my relatives to go exact vengeance and kill the murderer. Now, this was obviously an analog. This story never happened. This story, what she was trying to do was say, look, these two people killed each other. The two sons, one killed another in the field. Nobody is a witness. There's no witnesses to the crime. Nobody witnessed Avshalom killing Amnon either. And, just like what happened, of course, is that David HaMelech said, you don't have to divulge his location. And moreover, I'll protect him. Nobody will be able to kill him. So then she turns around and she says, well, the whole thing was a ruse. Never happened. Not only that, how could you believe it would happen? How could you believe such a story? She says to David HaMelech. David HaMelech is the king. This woman puts on a story. Then she says to David HaMelech, how could you believe such a story? Do you think that we live in a nation of vigilantes? They didn't go out and kill somebody without proper justice? There's no court here. I told you a story about somebody who wants to exact retribution when they never went to court. There were no witnesses. There's no way the story could have even happened. And then she drops the ball and says basically the same thing is true of Avshalom. It's time to bring him back. Avshalom also killed, but there was also no witnesses. It's not your responsibility to exact justice when your systems of justice don't allow for it. If there are no witnesses, there's no way you can execute the murderer. And the same thing is true. And moreover, look at Avshalom. Avshalom killed somebody, Amnon, who was guilty of rape. Amnon raped his sister, and nobody exacted justice from Amnon. Amnon's crime went unpunished. And finally, she finishes with a very profound statement. She says, Kimois nomos, we're all going to die. Uchemayim hanigorim artsa sheloye yosefu, like water that flows downwards. It's never gathered back up. V'lo yisa lekim nefesh, God doesn't forgive. In other words, you, King David, are not obligated to sort of perfect the world in justice. That's God's responsibility. Let God take his retribution. God exacts plans so that no banishment remains permanent. And just like God makes sure no banishment remains permanent, you too should not banish Avshalom. That's her argument. But there's a very profound statement here that God makes sure that nothing is banished. The idea here is that nothing goes to waste. There is no Jewish soul that God allows to rot and waste. Everything is going to have to reveal itself spiritually. The Tekoite woman, remember the woman who comes from the town Tekoa, which has the best olive oil, and very intelligent woman, she teaches this message that no matter how insignificant a Jew is, God will make sure that significance comes from that Jew. And that's why Yaakov Avinu goes back for the Pachim Ktanim. The Pachim Ktanim might have been empty. There might have been nothing inside. But when Yaakov Avinu goes back to get these empty vessels, what Yaakov Avinu is doing is Yaakov Avinu saying these insignificant people, these insignificant jugs, they will achieve significance. They'll achieve the significance later on of being filled with olive oil and being the olive oil that's used for the miracle of the lights that happens in the temple. In Kabbalah, we speak of the world as filled with lights and vessels, oiros and kalim. Yaakov Avinu went back for a vessel. He went back for a pach. But that pach would later be filled with the light of the Menorah, the miracle that happens with the oil that burns for 8 nights and brings in a tremendous light in the world. Because the truth of the matter is that the time of Chanukah is very much a dark time. First of all, physically, in the regular yearly cycle, as Robert Frost might say, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. Right? Chanukah is the darkest evenings. Chanukah is very often, depending obviously on the year, but it's roughly speaking around the winter solstice. December 21st, the darkest days of the year. The days with the least amount of sunlight. In Psikta speaks of the pre-creation darkness. Chayshach zu Yavan. The darkness that existed, this is an allusion to the kingdom of the Syrian Greeks that subjugated the Jews at the time of the miracle of Chanukah. They brought a tremendous amount of darkness to the world. The world was very dark. They restricted the Jews to study Torah. One was not allowed to study Torah. Sadly, observance was extremely weak. The religious were significantly marginalized. Many, many Jews Hellenized. They would sort of cover up their circumcisions and try to participate in the Olympics. The miracle of Chanukah is a miracle that in that dark place, there was still a light. The Greeks came into the temple. What did they do? They defiled the whole thing. They came in, they wrecked everything. They defiled not only the oils, they defiled the altar, they defiled the whole temple. They destroyed everything. And yet in this darkness comes a miracle of light. There's a miracle, there's a light to the darkness, and that light comes from the oil. The oil of that insignificant vessel is now filled, and it creates a tremendous light. This light is not just a light of its time, a light of the miracle of Chanukah. It's a much deeper light. The Rekeach, an early Kabbalist, one of the Rishonim, he points out that there are 36 lamps we light on Chanukah. If you subtract the shamash, you get 36. This corresponds to the 36 hours that God had when God created the world. There was a spiritual light that one can use to see across the world. And that light was hidden. But the light shone for 36 hours. Says the Rekeach, the light of the Menorah, the light that we light on Chanukah, it's reminiscent of that light. Chanukah is bringing in that light. When is that light going to come to its fruition? In the time of Mashiach. Chanukah is sort of a preparation. We're sort of getting a small light of the light of Mashiach happens at the time of Chanukah. When everything will eventually, at that time, how does the fight between Yaakov and Esav end? Between Yaakov and the angel of Esav. The sun comes out. Chanukah is sort of a microcosm of the sun coming out. The sun coming out, obviously, is when Mashiach is going to arrive. When the Geula comes. But for that time, for the period in the darkness, there's a light that shines through. That's the light of Chanukah. The light, the original light of creation, and that will be the light that will be revealed at the end of time. If you look from a standpoint of Jewish law, Chanukah is a relatively speaking minor holiday. Almost every other holiday is more significant than Chanukah. But if you look in the world, contemporary society, it seems that secular Jews resonate most with Chanukah. There's many different reasons for this, but perhaps the reason is the message of Yaakov and the Tekoite woman. The message of Chanukah, in a deep sense, is the light that comes from even small matters, even what seems to be insignificant. On a grand scale, the miracle of Chanukah seems to be an insignificant miracle as well. The main miracle of Chanukah is obviously the miracle of the battlefield. That actually made a significant difference to everyone's life, but that's not the miracle we celebrate. We celebrate a miracle that people were able to light a lamp in the temple. Okay? Who saw that lamp? I don't know. A couple people, maybe a few hundred people. Moreover, by the way, it's interesting that the law in the temple is that if the temple is completely defiled, you can light the menorah with non-kosher oil. So, in a certain sense, they could have lit the menorah without the oil. They couldn't find kosher oil, you can use non-kosher oil then. If there's zero kosher oil, you can use non-kosher. If there is kosher oil, then you're not allowed to use non-kosher oil. So they found one jar. Okay, so they'll light one jar of kosher oil, and then they'll use non-ritually pure oil. It doesn't seem like it's the requirement for a miracle. You know, you look at Kriyas Yamsuf, right? The splitting of the sea. The Egyptians are chasing the Israelites. They're sort of about to be killed. They're between a rock and a hard place. And God splits the sea, they go through it, and he kills it. He smites all the Egyptians. That's a miracle that's really needed. We really needed that miracle. We went through the desert for 40 years. Well, we needed a place to stay, right? We needed tents or clouds of glory to protect us. The miracle of Chanukah is a relatively insignificant miracle. It's not one that we needed, because we didn't. The miracle of Chanukah is that there's significance to the insignificant. That there's going to be a light from creation, and a light that will take us through to the final redemption. The word Chanukah means chinuch. Chinuch is education, more like initiation is probably the better translation. As a matter of fact, in the time of the Syrian Greeks, they defiled the altar. They had to reconsecrate a new altar. That in Hebrew, that's called Chanukas HaMezbeach, the initiation of the new altar. Chanukah is to initiate us to the light of Mashiach. I want to finish with a medrash. Medrash in Yalkut Shemaini, it says the Jewish people are compared to an olive tree. Shenemar, as the verse states in Yirmiyah, Zayis Ra'anon Yefei Peri, an olive tree with beautiful fruit. Kara Hashem Shimcha, God called as your name. God calls us an olive tree, the olive oil. That olive oil that goes into the pach, that olive oil of the brilliance of that woman of Tekoa, that's what God calls us. God is compared to a ner, a candle. Ki ner Hashem nishmas adam, because the soul of man is the candle of God. Obviously, together, oil and a flame create light. And by us joining together with God, we light up the world. As the verse states, Kumi Oiri, when the redemption comes, Kumi Oiri, the light will come out, Kiva Oirach, because the time of our illumination has arrived. Furthermore, the Medrash says, Ba'orcha nira or. Ba'orcha, in your light, nira or, we will see light. Now you might think that's pretty obvious, right? In your light, we will see light. Probably. It says the Medrash, Shona Rabbi Seinu, B'shosha melech HaMashiach bo, when Mashiach arrives, Aymid al Gag Beis HaMikdash, he'll stand on top of the temple, and he'll announce to the Jewish people, Anovim higiyaz mangu laschem, humble ones, the time of your redemption has arrived. And as I'm sure you might imagine, a bunch of Jews are going to be sitting there, and they're going to say, how do we know? Right? Who says? How do we know you're the real deal? If you don't believe me, look at the light that's shining upon you. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Kumi Oirich Kiva Oirich. Chved Hashem La'ach Zarach. And this is the explanation of Ba'orcha Nira Or. In the revelation of the original Or, we will recognize the light of Mashiach. And now we can understand this Medrash. Put it all together. Chanukah, we're initiating the light of Mashiach. The Greeks came to darken the world, that there should not be a final redemption. And in Chanukah, we remind ourselves of the original light, the pre-creation light, the light of the hidden light that God hid in the Torah. And we habituate ourselves, we initiate ourselves, that when Mashiach comes and he stands on the temple and he says, how do you know it's me? It's me because you saw me in the Chanukah Menorah. That's where you saw me. Because when you see the Mashiach, when we see the Mashiach arrive, should be Menorah b'yameinu, speedily in our days, we're going to recognize him. What's he going to look like? He's going to look like the light of the Menorah. When we light a Menorah on Chanukah, and we feel that light, we feel the inspiration inside of us, the light that penetrates all the darkness, whether the darkness is today, in the time of year, in the time that we live in the time of the Chanukah miracle, the light that penetrates through it, which was fulfilling, giving significance, filling the vessels with light. That's the light that will remind us of who the Melech HaMashiach is, should come speedily in our days. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming.